This talk this afternoon looks at the following questions. What cultural values can we draw on to develop a deep conversation between the United States and China? To build a healthy global community, both the United States and China must appreciate the important cultural values that each country gives as a gift to the world. The United States lives out 4 cultural values. One is the value of compassion. 2 is the value of individual rights. 3 is the value of representative government. And 4 is the cultural value of hope. On the Chinese side, China has a tradition of its own 4 cultural values. One is focus on the family. 2 is harmony in balance. 3 is creativity in learning from others, creativity by learning from others. And 4 is the cultural value of efficiency in results. Both the United States and China are the 2 biggest economies in the world today. Economically, the United States embodies monopoly capitalism. China lives out socialism with particular characteristics. One country looks to the resources of the world's superpower while remaining patriotic. The other looks forward to Chinese cheap labor and a billion-plus potential consumer market. Historically, the United States originated in 1787, and China has a 5,000-year civilization. Spiritually, one is mainly a Jewish Christian culture. The other has a predominant humanist culture. Globally, the United States represents the older world powers of Western Europe. China stands for the emerging BRICS regional partners of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Sociologically, both countries are opposites. One relies heavily on individualism. The other supports more of family collectivity. So how do we bring these 2 countries, these 2 economic powers, into conversation? For me, rather than starting with doctrine or ideology or politics or economic disputes, we want to create a conversation by appreciating the persisting values in both countries. By looking at these cultural values found in each country's culture, we hope to bring about a discussion leading to mutual friendship and harmony between these 2 economic powers. A conversation on values and culture can help clarify the relation between the United States and China in 2 ways. First, I think that contemporary debates about the U.S. and China overemphasize the sharp differences between the world's current economic players. Academics, politicians, media figures are debating the relationship between the U.S. and China from the perspective of economics. Though we recognize the materiality of this economic analysis, we are suggesting that it fails to account for the persisting values found in each country's culture. I believe that the economic engines of both countries are built around these values and culture. These values in culture act as taken for granted substructures that are passed down from generation to generation. And because they persist over time, they are transcendent values. Because these values are essential to the foundation of the cultures, they are ultimate concerns. Second, I think that the identity formation for each nation depends on these transcendent cultural values. Each country has its cultural values historically rooted in a common story used to create a certain desired definition of what it means to be human in a cultural context. To be an American and to be a Chinese is to adopt certain values found in each country's culture. They are transcendent values because they go beyond one generation, one individual, or one time period. They are part of the culture because culture entails the entire way of life of a people. Culture includes all that human labor produces. It also includes the artistic creativity of a people, and culture includes the spiritual personality of a civilization. In the historical journey of America and China, certain values can be seen in the labor, the art, and spirit of each country's identity. And so, we want to use the examples of both countries to ask the question, what are the particular life-giving values that define being human for Americans and Chinese? In other words, we are pursuing a comparative discussion of transgenerational, transcendent, life-giving, ultimate values underlying what being human means for these two great cultures. These values determine how the two societies believe in and practice being human in political organization, in education, in family relations, in business negotiations, perceptions of right and wrong, spiritual worldviews, and cultural formations. In this way, transcendent values motivate both the U.S. and China, even as political and economic configurations change over time. So what we want to do for the rest of our time is to explain the four cultural values of the United States, look at the four cultural values of China, and then have some conversation amongst all of us. As we said, the United States suggests at least four fundamental values through generations. First is compassion, which comes from its Jewish heritage. The second is individual rights, which comes from its ancient Greek tradition. Third is representative government, which comes from ancient Roman tradition. And fourth is hope, which comes from a Christian tradition. When I talk about these four as cultural values that have transcended time, I don't mean that America is exactly like each of these four. What I mean is that these four are some of the basic values that mix together into an American culture. As we enter American culture, we engage, among other things, the story, the narrative of these four values. So first, compassion. The value of compassion permeates ancient Judaism and the Hebrew Bible. The ancient Hebrew people, or Jewish people, had the following belief. Because their God, Yahweh, had shown compassion to them, they must show compassion to other people. The ancient Hebrew God, Yahweh, showed his decisive compassion to people who were physically oppressed and emotionally hurt during the story of the Exodus. Around 1710 BCE, the Hebrews were slaves in Egypt. Because of extreme exploitation, they called out to Yahweh, who heard their pain and their suffering. Then Yahweh led them in an exodus from slavery. In the Old Testament, it tells the following story in the book of Exodus. It says, quote, "The Lord Yahweh said, I have observed the misery of my people who are in Egypt. I have heard their cry on account of their taskmasters. Indeed, I know their sufferings, and I have come down to deliver them from the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of that land to a good and broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey. The cry of the Israelites have now come to me. I have also seen how the Egyptians oppressed them." End of quote. This important passage shows a culture of belief in a profound compassion as part of what it means to be a people or to be human. In this sense, Yahweh gives his Jewish followers an example of how they should act on earth. Whenever they hear pain or suffering or crying, they are to respond by getting people out of their negative situations. In addition to helping people who are vulnerable, the ancient Hebrews also needed to provide a better future life. And so the cultural value of compassion has at least two parts. One part is to hear the suffering and to have compassion for those who suffer. The second part is to help them move from a bad situation to a good situation. To help them move from a bad situation to a good situation by providing the resources that the people need in order to have a life of prosperity. The second cultural value in the American story is individual rights. The American value of individual rights comes out of the ancient Greek civilization. It is generally accepted, at least in the West, that Athens, a major state in ancient Greece, developed the first Western democracy. Although limited to free adult males of Athens, Athenian citizenship granted full and active participation in every decision of the state without regard to a citizen's wealth or his class. Democracy stands for each citizen having individual rights in Athens to decide his own individual destiny. The essence of democracy in Athens was the sovereignty of the people. While other values were undoubtedly important in Athenian society, the three concepts of equality before the law, freedom of speech, and community identity seem to have been the central values of the democratic system of ancient Greece. And so in Athens, Greece, an organization called the Assembly, stood at the core of individual rights in the 6th through the 4th centuries BCE. Final authority in all things rested with the assembly of all adult free males who were Athenians, citizens of Athens. Debate in the assembly was free and open. Any citizen of Athens could submit legislation, offer amendments, and argue the merits of any question. The popular assembly consisted of all male citizens, and they were not represented by politicians or even elected officials. This assembly of the people, or People's Assembly, decided on every decision that concerned the state of Athens. Now, in addition to the People's Assembly, they also had in Athens a popular court, or a people's court, which made judgments, or took decisions on important disputes and arguments. Out of the group of male citizens, leaders were chosen by lot. That is, they were blindly chosen, which was a random method of selecting leadership. When poor citizens became leaders, they were paid money so that they could still have an income when they served as elected officials. Also, at any time, ordinary citizens could remove any public official. For example, in Athens, at the end of each year, all officials had to come before the people, and the people could then decide whether the official had been a good or bad leader. If the people judged the man a bad leader, he could no longer keep his job. This practice of each citizen having the individual right to judge and remove leaders was especially the case starting in 1460 BCE. During this time, officials each year had to report how much money they owned, and they also stood before the public and were asked questions by the people. And so democracy in ancient Athens allowed each citizen to have a voice both in questions of policy and administration. We find here in ancient Athens, democracy is constituted through institutions and practices, mentalities, and ideologies. In Greece, these different components of democracy reached their fullest development in the 5th and 4th centuries BCE. It meant that all the citizens, that is, male free citizens, were able to engage in policies and discussions in the assembly, the council, the popular courts, and with political leaders. Perhaps of all the 4 transgenerational foundational values in American culture, that is, the values of compassion, individual rights, representative government, and hope, perhaps the most foundational value in American culture today is this idea of freedom of individual rights. For example, in 1620, British citizens from England left England and sailed to Plymouth Rock, Massachusetts. They were among the first British people to settle in North America. And they came to North America with this idea of freedom. 100 years later, in 1776, this Massachusetts colony, along with 12 other American colonies, founded, as we know, the United States of North America by first declaring their independence from King George in England. The 13 colonies wanted to create their own United States of America. In fact, one of their key slogans as they fought against King George in 1776 was the following slogan: "Give me liberty or give me death." And later, the founders of this new nation, called the United States, wrote a specific constitution for this young country. These founding fathers met in 1787 and created the same constitution which Americans still have today. It is no accident that the First Amendment of the United States Constitution guarantees freedom of speech to each individual American citizen. The third cultural value in the U.S. is what we call representative government. Representative government means, in the U.S. context, that there are forms of government, there are three forms of government, and none of the three has the ability to decide over the other. For example, when the Founding Fathers created the United States in 1787, they established these three forms of national governing. Congress is the legislative branch. It makes the laws. The White House is where the president executes the laws. And the third, the Supreme Court, is where the top judges decide on what is good and bad laws. This process is called checks and balances. Its purpose is to make sure citizens of the U.S. have a national government that will prevent the rise of one ruler like King George, who governed England in 1776. However, this third cultural value of representative government can be traced back to ancient Rome, particularly the Roman periods of the monarchy in 753 BC to 509 BCE, and the second Roman period of the Republic, 508 BCE to 27 BCE. In each of these two ancient Roman periods, we see how Rome dealt with the challenge of several functions of government. During the monarchy period, Roman government consisted of the king, the Senate, and the assembly. Obviously, the king was one person. The Senate had up to 300 powerful men, and the assembly was made up of ordinary people. The king held the power of what was called the imperium, which meant he had the power to give commands and make sure that citizens followed his orders. If there was resistance, the king could use his fines or arrest people, and in certain cases have them killed for disobeying him. Now, though the king had such overwhelming power, he still was elected to be king, and he was approved by the second branch of the Roman government, the Senate. And then the third, the people of the assembly, the third branch of Roman government, the people of the assembly voted to give the king the power or to deny him this privilege. The interaction of these three branches of Roman government entailed a Senate giving power to a king whose authority is ultimately confirmed by the people in their assembly. At first, it might appear as if the king had absolute power. Indeed, he was responsible for the army, and he was the main judge and the top religious leader. However, because the members of the Senate served for life, they carried a lot of weight in their own power. Now, moving from the time of the monarchy to the time of the Republic, they also had three forms of government. They had two consuls, they had the Senate, and they had the assembly. The two consuls replaced the office of the king, and in order for them to make decisions on policy, they both had to agree. So even in this one branch of the consuls, there were checks and balances. If we were to pinpoint or point to a single major principle controlling the governance of the Roman Republic, it is this: all state organs were linked together by coordination and cooperation, and only if they act together, jointly, could they create the will of the state. Ancient Roman government was one of shared powers and thus a limited government. The fourth and final cultural value in the U.S. is hope. This is a strong belief in American culture, which states that no matter what the situation, there is always a way out. No matter how dark today is, there will be one day a better tomorrow, and a sense that victory is inevitable. Before we look at the relationship of the value of this, what we call hope coming from Christianity in American culture, we first have to comment on the role of religion in American law. The Constitution of the United States of America states that there will always be a separation between the church and the government. This, too, was another reaction against the old feudal order and the king type of government in England and Europe. When the Founding Fathers created the United States in 1787, they accepted the power of human reason and science over superstition and religion. And so they refused to allow religion to play a legal role in the government. And they also prevented the government from interfering with each citizen's individual rights to have a religion. However, we could state, and I state, that American culture is very, very much impacted by religion. Although the law separates them, in practice, the culture itself is very impacted by religion. And again, though Judaism, Islam, and other religions are present in the United States, the dominant, Christianity is the dominant religion in the culture. For example, two of the biggest holidays or festivals in the U.S. are Christmas, December 25th, and Easter during March or April. In the Christian story, Christmas is the day that Christians believe that their God, Jesus, was born between 0 and 3 BCE. And Easter is the day in the Christian story that Christians believe that Jesus was murdered but rose from the dead and floated into heaven in 33 BCE. In addition, American culture sees Saturday as a day of rest. Coincidentally, the Jewish Christian story claims that this is the day that their God Yahweh rested after he created everything. Similarly, Sunday is seen as a day of rest so that Christians can go to church and worship their God. For Christians, Sunday is also the day in their story that Jesus rose up from the dead after he was killed on Friday. Now again, we want to repeat, none of these days or festivals by law are Christian days for the government. We only are making the point that they emphasize American culture. Belief in Christian and God or Jesus exists in other parts of American culture and history. For example, the U.S. dollar. The U.S. dollar bill has these words written on the dollar: "In God we trust." When American people pledge allegiance to their flag, the Stars and Stripes in the U.S., they state that the United States is one nation under God. On July 4th, 1776, when the Founding Fathers stated that they would no longer be British citizens under King George, they wrote the Declaration of Independence. In that document, the founders mentioned God. Even the national song of the country, the Star-Spangled Banner, which was written in September 1814, this song is the official song of the country. And in that song, one verse says, "In God is our trust." In 1607, the first group of British citizens who arrived in Jamestown, Virginia, in the New World of America. One of the first things they did as travelers was to build a Christian church. In fact, when these travelers and colonists from Britain met together for the first time to decide local laws for the colony, they met in the church. The second group of British citizens arrived in the New World in 1620. They were the Pilgrims, who landed their boats on Plymouth Rock, and they specifically saw themselves as a chosen people of God in a new frontier. Again, we're just trying to paint a picture to show how this question of cultural value of hope is coming out of one of the American traditions, that is the Christian tradition. This new message of hope is also a message of new life and a free life, and it has very powerful importance in the American cultural story. So why don't we switch to China and look at 4 of its values. We mentioned that our understanding of at least four important values, cultural values in the Chinese story are focused on family, harmony and balance, creativity by learning from others, and efficiency in results. For many Americans, let's look at the first cultural value, family and focus. For many Americans, to understand China, one of the first things is grasping how important the family is in the focus of Chinese life. There are some obvious contrasts with the United States situation. For example, in Chinese culture, there is a saying that one respects the old and protects the young. This, from American perspective, this can be seen in the close relationship of 3 generations of family members. In America, there exist homes where grandparents are sent to live by themselves. In China, the grandparents have an important responsibility of taking care of their grandchildren. This can mean that values and virtues and visions are transferred from the grandparents to the grandchildren. Therefore, there is a clear continuity of stability and purpose in this Chinese family form. Moreover, grandparents or many grandparents live with their children and grandchildren. Likewise, Americans notice how much attention parents pay to raising their children. Perhaps part of this careful attention is because of the one-child policy. Yet I think the importance of children goes beyond the recent one-child policy. Within the culture, children are seen as flowers, needing protection and nurturing. And we've observed parents who save money for their children's future. There are examples of fathers who move the entire family to another city because he wants the best place for his son's and daughter's education. In other words, children are taken very seriously as the future of the family and as the future of the nation. And so parents, grandparents, and the entire household can focus on children. And finally, from Americans' perspective, Chinese children have a deep respect for their parents and grandparents. This family and focused cultural value not only applies to the biological family. China at times as a country is seen as a motherland and even as a family. As a Westerner, as an American who hosted the Chinese Olympics in 2008, one of the things that struck me were the number of songs that were sang, and the words of the song says, "China is our mother." I have never heard a song in the United States that has ever referred to the United States as a mother. Not that it hasn't been written, I have never heard of it. The point is just to show contrasts and cultural values in order to develop a conversation. Now, this issue of focus on family can be seen in some of the foundational documents in China, which I won't go into. We can talk about more, but there are examples I have here in reference to Confucius tradition, Taoist tradition, and even the art of war. Let's turn to the second cultural value in Chinese culture, which I call harmony in balance. Harmony in balance. An American who spends time in China will also experience the language and practice of harmony in balance. Government leaders use the word harmony. Calligraphy painters use the word harmony. Tai Chi masters refer to harmony. Indeed, Chinese culture has a deep history of emphasizing harmony. For example, the Chinese language is a language of implying and indirect meaning. Such talking maintains harmony among people because citizens do not want to offend other citizens. Likewise, modesty in public helps collective balance in social relations. An author in a book comments on this question of harmony and balance when he says, quote, the book Tending the Roots of Wisdom, containing traditional Chinese thoughts of Buddhism, this book points out the virtue of modesty. It says, on a narrow road, one should stop and wait until another from the other side to pass first. It goes on to say, when having delicious food, one should set aside 1/3 to share with others. Close quote. The cultural value of humility means each individual shares credit with the others, like one's coach, one's leaders, or one's country. There is the respect for rules and authority and the group. Part of the traditional worldview in the Chinese cultural value of harmony and balance, part of this traditional view is to avoid extremes and to see things as being somewhere in the middle. Related to this balance is the use of the word maybe. Americans are trained to give a sharp yes or no in answering. Either it's yes or no. Whereas in China, different things can take place at the same time. In other words, two contradictory phenomena, two contradictory things can coexist, and they don't have to always attack and defeat each other. Therefore, room exists for differences. In fact, the answer to a question can be maybe, which often drives Americans crazy. Drives this American crazy. Furthermore, harmony and balance means a deep level of tolerance in Chinese culture. In certain Western cultures, not all, but in certain Western cultures, some of the citizens who are Christians interpret their Christianity as absolute, as non-sharing religion. Not all, but some Christians. Whereas it seems to me in Chinese culture, there is a mixing of different religions. And there is no warfare, say, between Taoism and Confucianism. These two do not try to eliminate Buddhism. In fact, Chinese religious believers can mix Taoism with Buddhism, and in certain instances, people can be Christians and still honor their ancestors. I think this cultural value of harmony and balance has direct implications for world peace. China, as a major country in the 21st century, can give the world a philosophy and a value of world peace based on the practice of harmony. We find in Chinese culture the importance of the individual keeping his or her spirit, and body in balance. Then maintaining harmony in the family. Similarly, having balance among humans, nature, and the entire universe. There's also the move to maintain balance in the nation. And balance in the nation can help build balance among countries globally. And perhaps this issue of harmony and balance can help give us a formula for world peace. A tolerance of different economic and political systems, peaceful coexistence, and the perspective that difference does not mean deficiencies. Scholar Dwight N emphasizes the Western extreme individualism when he writes, quote, he explains that Western individualism is, quote, not at all compatible with the cherished value of harmony as both societal goal and cosmic ideal, as he describes in East Asian thought. He goes on to say that Taoism, Confucianism, and Buddhism all have one thing in common: the strong stress on harmony. Dwight N writes that in the perspective of these three great Chinese systems of thought, to be fully human requires the courage and wisdom of constantly harmonizing oneself with an ever-enlarging network of relationships. And this relationship includes nature, end quote. Confucianism emphasizes such harmony when Confucius Kongzi writes, quote, do not do unto others what you would not want others to do unto you, close quote. If all peoples in a country pursued this benevolent self-interest, harmony would appear in social relations. In fact, Mencius claims that harmony in relationship stands at the core of what it means to be human. He writes the following words, quote, there is no greater joy for me than to find, on self-examination, that I am true to myself. So try your best to treat others as you wish to be treated yourself, and you will find that this is the shortest way to humanity. And Confucius again offers harmony as the highest expressions of the rights. And he says, of the things brought about by the rights, harmony is the most valuable. Confucius scholar of the Ming Dynasty also writes about this harmony in his book, Prudent Words. He says, quote, if the monarch and his officials are on good terms, national affairs will be peaceful. If the nation is peaceful, its people will live a happy life. Therefore, harmony is the way of managing a country, close quote. So harmony, in fact, does have practical lessons for how to govern a country. Good leadership does not come mainly from technocratic knowledge and organizational management. Of course, these are needed to run a country. Effective governance results from good relations among leadership, which then helps to bring about peace in the nation, which then helps to bring about happiness among the citizens. A country runs smoothly when its citizens are happy. Perhaps Taoism is the most clear in its explanation of harmony and balance. The yin-yang are at the center of this philosophy or way of life. Yin-yang achieve harmony through their interaction. The balance of opposites enables life energy to continually spread and grow. Lao Tzu writes the following, difficult and easy complete each other. Long and short contrast with each other. High and low are distinguished from each other. Sound and voice harmonize with each other. Front and back follow each other, end quote. And so harmony and balance connects opposites in motion. And it helps transformation and growth rather than stagnation and decay. That is why Lao Tzu uses words like complete, contrast, distinguish, harmonize, and follow. Harmony comes about with the balanced interaction of opposites. Let us move to the third cultural value in Chinese tradition. We call this creativity by learning from others. With creativity by learning from others, I mean a Chinese core value that embraces things that are either different or foreign in order to enhance Chinese creativity and innovation. For example, in Chinese culture, there exists this practice of learning from other models. This can be seen in the fields of technology, but also in the culture areas such as classical European opera. Perhaps the amazing policy shift to reform and opening up best represents how China has accelerated its own unique creativity through learning from others. Theoretically, China is the first country in human history to advance the idea of socialism with Chinese characteristics or a socialist market economy. It keeps the centrality of the state and the collective, and yet it draws heavily on lessons from the capitalist West. It has modified and pushed forward Marxist theory, as well as educated capitalist theory about the unity between markets and planned economy. It is showing that socialist countries use the market and also five-year plans, and it has shown that capitalist countries likewise use planning in their economies along with market forces. China, with creativity by learning from others, has revolutionized the old, stale international language about West versus East, or capitalism versus socialism. The experience of the Chinese people has proven that that old type of language is not only irrelevant, but defeats human progress the world needs in the area of economic development. There are probably several reasons why China is keen on having creativity and innovation by learning from others, even those who differ. One reason might be China's wisdom, which was gained from a history of being occupied by other nations. Sometimes a country that has endured or experienced foreign occupations knows deeply the importance of peaceful coexistence and sharing of international expertise and achievements. Perhaps another reason for creativity by learning from others is the Chinese work style of building teams with a team leader. Commenting on the way of life of many paths to a higher purpose. Again, Dui Ming says how Taoism and Confucianism and Buddhism offer many paths to moral and spiritual self-cultivation. He writes the following: exclusivism in ethical religious thought is rejected mainly because by insisting upon a single path, it would be incapable of accommodating the different interests and concerns of human beings as a whole, end quote. So here when he's saying that ethics or morality or values in China touch on individual self-cultivation, which helps the family and the nation. But also the creativity by learning from others speaks to another larger issue. The best way for one country might not be the best way for a different country. What is at stake is, does a country think in exclusive terms? If it does, there is a higher degree of isolationism and protectionism. If a country opens up, like the case of China, a country can become much more innovative and creative by being in conversation with and learning from other nations. Consequently, creativity by learning from others can lead to respect for differences, a healthy dialogue, and mutual understanding. Respect, dialogue, and understanding can help the family of nations to practice and enjoy peace. Here too, in this value, we can refer to writings of Lao Tzu and Kongzi, both in their major writings and in their minor writings. But let us conclude our attempt to put in conversation the USA and China by looking at China's fourth and final cultural values. That is efficiency in results. When I mean efficiency in results, I'm referring to the efficiency with which Chinese culture gets things done. In this sense, from an American perspective, the Chinese does not see efficiency judged by how much talking one does, but the criterion is efficiency in results. One example of this are the construction projects. The government sets a goal to achieve infrastructure development or expand business enterprises, and these goals are achieved. And they can be achieved within the projected timetable, and sometimes they are achieved or the goals are reached ahead of schedule. One example is the preparation for the opening ceremony at the 2008 Beijing Olympics. There is a well-known story of how the director of the opening ceremony had gathered his team of people to work on the opening ceremony, and they set a time and a plan, and the team met the plan and the time. And for those who were there, I was there, it was one of the most beautiful human experiences globally. Let me allow for some time for our discussion and conversation by concluding. As I stated at the beginning, there are many ways to engage a conversation between the United States of America and the People's Republic of China, the world's two major economic powers. If the goal of the conversation is to foster mutual harmony and friendship for each country, for the world, for nature, and in fact, the whole cosmos, we are suggesting going deeply into cultural values that are transcendent, that are passed on generation to generation, cultural values that are underneath the history and the current political and economic systems in both countries. Let's say this a different way. We are suggesting the need to build healthy human families, healthy communities, healthy countries, and individuals by looking at a spiritual level. After things come and go, after people pass from youth to old age, after countries change or modify their economic and political systems, what does a country's long-term spiritual personality look like? In our talk today, we have offered 4 from the U.S. side and 4 from the Chinese side. And hopefully this will be a basis for fruitful conversation. Thank you.